There are a few skills that are still relevant in this future of work with the rise of AI. One of them is persuasion and the art of negotiation. And in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about what I've learned from this book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, a book on negotiation and persuasion. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned. And I will summarize this book in about like 3 sentences. The first is Chris Voss argues that many negotiation models fail because people treat negotiation as rational. They think people are rational in a negotiation event, when in reality, people tend to be emotional, impulsive, and fear driven, right? And one thing he did highlight a lot in this book is that a lot of things in life are actually negotiations. So a key area where I applied this book was in negotiating my rent, for example. But even beyond that, in your career, in your finances, in your relationships with people, most times the negotiation, and it tends to be within two things, either information gathering and behavioral influencing. So think of it as like you want to achieve an outcome, and people have like, I would say, conflicting needs and wants, and it's finding what's the best point to read. Thing that you most likely want to do is like split the difference, like compromise. But Chris Voss argues against compromise. He says a good negotiator should be able to shape the other side's reality and craft agreements that are actually better than just like meeting halfway. And something that came to mind when I was reading this book, it wasn't in the book, but I don't know if you remember the story of like King Solomon and how he was wise and how two women came to him and said, "Oh, this child is my child," and the other one was like, "Oh, this child is my child," and he was like, "Okay, well, let's cut the child into two." Like that seems like a compromise, right? Obviously not. But it just goes to say sometimes like the best agreement is just splitting the difference or meeting halfway. Sometimes it's shaping the other person's reality. And then in this book, he introduces some interesting techniques that I will go across, and the last one will be very interesting. He talks about tactical empathy, he talks about mirroring, he talks about labeling, he talks about asking calibrated how and what questions to uncover real motives and steer outcomes. So, a couple of things that were spoken about in this book. So, what is mirroring? Mirroring is also called ixopraxim, okay? And what it means essentially is imitation. It's another way where human beings display, like copy each other just to comfort each other. It can be done with speech patterns, body language, vocabulary, tempo of your voice, tone of voice. Most times an unconscious behavior. Think about it when you're with your friends. Sometimes you tend to, if you spend time with someone long enough, you tend to like imitate some of their characteristics, right? And that's just basically what mirroring is. It's a kind of rapport that essentially leads to trust. And how does this help you in negotiation? Voss argues that a good negotiator like prepares in going in preparing for possible surprise. I will add the caveat that this book was hinging a lot on his lessons as an FBI negotiator, but there are lessons you can apply to in your daily life. He says people who view negotiation as a battle of arguments become overwhelmed by the voices in their heads. So sometimes it's not, that's not the case, right? So slow it down, quiet the voices in your head. I watch a lot of SWAT and I see how the first thing they try to do is buy some time, because like once you slow it down and buy some time, you can make rational decisions. Think about what scam artists tend to try to use to scam people. They always have that element of hurry, that element of time pressure, and because it's time pressure, people tend to make irrational decisions. In the mirrored angle as well, he talks about using the late night FMDJ voice, but I don't know if Gen Z is would be able to relate to this, but basically that, soft tone of voice, inflecting your voice downward, keeping it calm, the assertive voice as well can be helpful, but is used rarely. It's also a positive and playful voice, which should be your default voice as well. Helps to show you as a easygoing, good-natured person. But anyway, mirroring work a lot of magic according to what he says. So practical tips for mirroring is like, repeating the last three words that the person said, trying to understand what they're saying, trying to insinuate similarity, trying to build rapport. I see it a lot again in the kind of like what happens in like SWOT negotiations, for example. Is like they're using mirroring to encourage the other side to keep talking. It's like, I understand you. People just want to be seen and heard, right? So it's like, I understand you. I understand where you're coming from. How can I help? So that's one aspect he talks about in the book. Another thing he talks about is labeling. So labeling essentially is calling out what the situation is. So the first thing he says is, imagine yourself in your counterpart situation, having that empathy. It doesn't always say you have to agree with the person's ideas or the person's position or the person's viewpoint, but just acknowledging the person's situation. He gives an example of someone that was in a hostage negotiation, and he was like, it seems like you don't want to go to jail. Even though the person might end up going to jail, he's just like labeling that situation. He also argues that the barriers to making an agreement is typically more powerful than the barriers to making the agreement, right? Than the influence to making the agreement. So it's like, focus on clearing those barriers, label your counterpart's fears to diffuse their powers, list the worst things they can say about you before they can say it. So I don't know, if you look at life in general and maybe having a conversation, if someone says, oh my god, I did this bad thing or I did this, labeling it, putting it out in the open, you as the other receiving end, you would now be like, oh my god, no, it wasn't that bad. Getting in front of things will put you in a better situation in negotiation, because most times people just want to be appreciated and understood, right? So using those labels to reinforce and encourage like positive perception and dynamics is helpful. Now this next tip was actually quite interesting, because in a negotiation you will think you're striving for a yes, and in many cases you are, and most times you try to avoid no questions. But he argues the opposite. He says that no is not a failure in negotiation, that no can actually be helpful in helping your speaker be comfortable, in helping your speaker allow the real issues to be brought forth. No, it protects people from making like ineffective decisions. No slows it things down so that people can actually freely embrace their decisions. No helps people feel safe, secure, emotionally comfortable, and in control of their decisions. So next time when you're speaking, like don't just ask yes questions. Ask no questions so you can get to the root of things, right? And it's a very interesting thing, because typically if you're conflict avoidance, you would just want to steer clear of like no and disagreements, but that's not the case. Before you can get to a good yes, you actually have to get to some no's. So this part is where I think a lot of you will like. It's basically on how to negotiate a better salary. I must confess, doing the summary, I'm like, I have to reread this book because there's so many gems, but I digress. The first thing is, be pleasantly persistent on non-salary terms. So give an example of a French lady who kept on asking for more vacation and more vacation and more vacation, and she was very pleasant but also persistent about it. And at some point, they're just like, okay, we can't give you more vacation, but we can't increase your salary. She also talks about salary terms without success terms is Russian roulette. If you're negotiating a better salary, there has to be metrics accompanied. If not, you don't know what you're doing. You have to clearly define, what does success look like in this role. He also talks about sparking interest in your success and being an unofficial mentor. So also asking like, what does it take to be successful here? When people give you advice, they most times want to see, would you follow the advice? And it kind of creates buy-in into your success. Another thing he mentions about negotiation is making it thoughtful. So instead of having a salary range of like 150 to 200, which is like just seems quite arbitrary, seems quite large, through the math, through the calculations, having odd numbers, having very precise figures helps to anchor the conversation and show that you put some thought into it. Instead of saying, let's say 100 to 150k, saying like 134.5 to 143 sounds very precise, sounds like you've put some thoughts into it, and most times people will tend to go to the lower number, which might in most cases be the number you're actually working towards, right? So it also just gives some practical tips and tricks for salary negotiation. Anyway, I hope with these few tips of mine I'll be able to influence you to get this book, go read it. I'll be curious to see what you learn. But yeah, it's always interesting when I read non-fiction books because they show a lot of germs from people's lives and lived experiences. Anyway, if you're new here, my name is AJ. I make videos on career, finance, future of work, lifestyle, AI, just a couple of different things I'm learning and sharing in my life to inspire you as well. So take care and look forward to my next video. Bye.